Relationships matter most. For over 80 years, Harvard researchers tracked thousands of people from college all the way to death. They measured everything, and the strongest predictor of who ended up happy came down to one thing: relationships. In the Harvard study of adult development, participants who reported being happiest in later life weren't the ones who were most successful on paper. They were the ones who felt closely connected to a few people they trusted. When participants said they had at least one person they could call in the middle of the night, their life satisfaction scores were much higher. People who didn't have that kind of support weren't just less happy, they showed more depression, more anxiety, and worse physical health. Social support doesn't have to look like a perfect nuclear family. Being married doesn't guarantee anything. Being in a warm, loving marriage does. Many single or divorced people in the study were just as happy, given they had deep friendships or close ties with siblings or adult children. The study also found that people who talk through their stress with someone they trust, ranting, crying, and sorting it out, handle it a lot better than people who try to keep everything to themselves. Even pets help more than you'd think. Interacting with a dog or cat can trigger some of the same oxytocin release you get from safe human contact. It's a different kind of bond, but it's still just as real. Across decades of follow-ups, happiness rose and fell with the strength of connections. Everyone says the people in their life matter most, and then that little screen time notification pops up on Sunday and shows you what you've been choosing over being happy. Success doesn't mean happiness. We tend to believe if we could just be successful enough, then we'll finally feel better. But people in the Harvard study did all that, and a lot of them still didn't like their lives. Psychiatrists George Valent and Robert Waldinger, who led this research over different decades, kept finding the same thing. High IQ, status, and impressive careers did not reliably predict who ended up happy. Once someone was smart enough to function well in the world, having an even higher IQ had no real link to life satisfaction. Being brilliant does not stop you from feeling lonely, anxious, or disappointed with how things turn out. It just makes you better at overthinking all the reasons you're still miserable. The study followed people who became top executives, doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs, as well as people who stayed in very ordinary jobs. The surprising part wasn't that success felt good in the moment, it was how useless it was at predicting whether someone actually liked their life when they went home at night. Some of the most impressive careers belong to people who can't stand their day-to-day existence, while plenty of average jobs belong to people who are genuinely content. Success clearly isn't the answer. But money does play a role in happiness, though probably not in the way you'd expect. More on that later. But first, there's something else worth knowing. Your past isn't your destiny. It's easy to tell yourself, with a childhood like mine, of course I'm messed up. But this 80-year project found some of the people with the roughest starts still ended up among the happiest. Data on childhood adversity shows it correlates strongly with struggles during your 20s and 30s. If you grew up with chaos or neglect, you probably had a harder time launching into adulthood. But as participants aged, that past trauma lost its grip, and childhood conditions barely factored into their life satisfaction. What dictated their happiness was what they did around age 50. If they built better habits, set boundaries, and found reliable friends during midlife, they turned their lives around. This means saying no to people who drain you, using positive ways to cope instead of turning to alcohol or drugs, getting the sleep you need, and spending more time with the people you care about. Some participants who coasted on stable, privileged upbringings ended up miserable because they never developed any resilience. Your early years explain why you hurt, but they don't dictate how your story finishes. Handling your emotions. The happiest people in this study had just as much stress as the unhappy ones. The difference was how they handled it. Researchers watched how participants reacted when life went sideways, and sorted their coping mechanisms into two categories. Mature coping involved humor, altruism, and anticipating problems before they exploded. Immature coping looks like denial, projection, and throwing full-grown adult tantrums over minor inconveniences. The data showed that people who couldn't regulate their emotions were always unhappy, no matter how good their circumstances looked. People who handle stress well still get upset, but they know when to walk away, calm down, and come back later instead of blowing up at everyone around them. They learn not to take everything so seriously and can laugh at their own mistakes. Keeping your temper in check is only half the equation. The ones who were happiest also had a sense of purpose. They felt like they were contributing to something larger than themselves. The study found that participants who developed an interest in guiding the next generation or giving back to their communities didn't just feel better, they stayed physically healthier and lived longer too. When you have a genuine purpose, a bad day is just a bad day. When you don't, every minor setback feels like the universe is out to get you. People who learn to control their reactions, attach themselves to something meaningful, and make light of their own absurdities are the ones who lead the happiest lives. Money and happiness. Money really does buy happiness. That is, up to a certain income. After that point, every extra dollar you chase is doing exactly zero for how happy you feel. Waldinger often points to the well-documented finding that your mood improves with income, but only until your basic needs and security are met. He referenced the classic $75,000 a year threshold, which adjusts up with inflation, to illustrate where the curve flattens out. Escaping poverty and constant financial pressure obviously relieves a huge burden. Once you cross that line of security, extra wealth doesn't fill an emotional vacuum. Participants who obsessed over accumulating more wealth often sacrificed their marriages and friendships to get it. They ended up with much bigger bank accounts and significantly lower life satisfaction. Grinding your health into dust to reach billionaire status makes terrible sense for your mood. Once your bills are paid and you can handle an emergency, buying more expensive things won't fix a miserable life. The 50-40-10 split. About half your happiness is set before you take your first breath. 10% comes from circumstances outside your control. That leaves another 40%. Looking at long-term fulfillment, researchers found a 50-40-10 breakdown. Your genetics and natural temperament lock in roughly 50% of your baseline mood. 10% gets dictated by sheer luck, health crises, and whatever life throws at you. But that last 40% is entirely driven by your daily choices and your mindset. That's the part you can actually change. It means focusing your energy on what actually matters, taking a second to appreciate what you have, figuring out how to decompress when you're stressed, and choosing to show up for the people you care about. You don't get to blame your DNA for everything. 40% is the piece you still control, and the study shows that is more than enough to actually become a happier person. Be present. The Harvard study found that most people spend their lives mentally somewhere else, while real life continues to pass them by. This chronic absence from your own existence does more damage to your happiness than almost anything else. Participants who actively paid attention to their daily routines reported much higher levels of joy. Being present and curious during mundane moments builds true satisfaction. It means enjoying what you are actually doing, noticing the smells of your breakfast, the temperature of the air, and the details of your surroundings. You can be on an incredible vacation and completely fail to enjoy it because you're staring at your phone. When your mind is constantly 1,000 miles away, you miss all the beauty right in front of you and the chance to share it with the people there with you. Trading your actual life to look at strangers on the internet starves your brain of real connection. You just end up with a blurry memory of your own day. People who are the happiest aren't doing incredible things every minute. They're just paying attention to whatever it is they're actually doing. Meanwhile, you keep scrolling through your phone looking for something to make you smile when it turns out you just need to look up. Experiences matter more than things. Buy something expensive and the thrill fades in weeks. Do something memorable and you'll still feel it years later. The Harvard study tracked exactly why one of these builds lasting happiness and the other doesn't. And it comes down to how your brain stores the two. The data firmly backs up spending your extra cash on experiences rather than physical things. When you buy a physical object, your brain quickly gets used to it through hedonic adaptation. That shiny new purchase just becomes the new normal, eventually joining the graveyard of useless gadgets already sitting in your closet. Experiences get stored completely differently. When you take a trip, learn a skill, or go to a concert, your brain locks that memory in and lets you relive it over and over. You talk about it with friends and integrate it into your identity. The memory brings you hits of happiness long after the event ends, while a physical object just depreciates and gathers dust. Happiness curve. Everyone assumes getting older means becoming more miserable, but this study found the exact opposite. Participants consistently got happier after age 50, and the researchers could practically predict the trajectory. The data maps out a U-curve of happiness. People generally hit their lowest point of satisfaction in early midlife, bogged down by career pressure and raising kids. Then, something surprising happens. As participants moved into their 50s, 60s, and 70s, their life satisfaction showed a clear upward trend. Older brains naturally start focusing on positive information and letting minor annoyances slide. Since the time horizon is visibly shorter, people stop wasting energy on things they don't enjoy. They cut out acquaintances they never really liked anyway, spend time with the people who matter, and savor the present moment. Getting older doesn't make you grumpy. It forces you to prioritize what feels good and ignore the rest. End-of-life regrets. When they asked people in their 80s what they'd do differently, men and women gave completely different answers. Both answers were devastating, and both proved the entire Harvard study right. Men most commonly wished they hadn't spent so much time at work. They regretted the evenings they stayed at the office while their personal lives crumbled, chasing promotions that didn't matter when they were old. They agonized over all the bedtimes, sporting events, and quiet weekend mornings they missed out on with their kids, letting all the important milestones slide, just to answer a few more emails. Women most commonly wished they hadn't worried so much about what other people thought of them. They regretted spending decades shrinking themselves to fit someone else's expectations instead of actually living. When the researchers asked these same participants about their proudest moments, nobody mentioned an award or a paycheck. Their greatest triumphs always involved the people they loved, the families they raised, or the friends they made along the way. The entire 80 years of data pointed right back to the beginning. Your relationships are the only things that really matter for happiness, especially at the very end.